So I'm here with Alexander Chatziioannou. Of course, I got it wrong again. Yeah, it's almost it's always almost right, but almost
It's an
it's also
improvement
wrong.
over the first time. Yeah, you're
Okay,
getting there. You're getting there.
at least we're improving. Yes, and he's a freelance journalist and also the author of From Ants to Zombies, published by Bitmap Books last year. So here we go, represent. As you can see now, it's From Zombies to Ants because it's reversed. But yes, I mean you get the drift. And yeah, we have him over today to discuss a little bit his work on the book, his background, his overall thing, so to speak. So, hello, Alexander. How are you doing today?
Hey, Damiano. I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm still adjusting to life after writing this block of text, I think.
So, you wanna tell us a little bit about your background? Where do you come from, and where do you go? And I'm gonna stop there because otherwise I'm gonna make some awful jokes.
Well, it's I mean, in terms of prior of what I was doing prior to writing about games, I basically was working as a lot of things as kind of English teacher, translator, etc., etc. I studied in the UK. I did English
Mhm.
literature and then history of film and visual media. Um, for a moment, on a couple of occasions, actually, I didn't learn from my first mistake. I thought about going the academic route uh,
Mhm.
first on film a long time ago. That was like 20 years ago. And then had a sudden flash and completely forgot all the things that put me off the first time and thought I might try and do that game studies thing that's been growing and growing.
Mhm.
I took a second stab at that uh, in the Netherlands, went to Utrecht University, but then I remembered how awful the whole academic uh, uh, path as the living conditions, the money, the constant work and constant stress, and I thought, yeah, probably not for me. Uh, so then, I had already started uh, dealing more seriously with games, though, through that. And I thought, why not start writing not from an academic standpoint, but from, a more kind of um, uh, pop writing standpoint. So yeah, that's how it started. First with local websites, outlets in Greece, then um, various English and American outlets. And from then on, it kind of led to here.
Of course, I'll have to ask this because that's something that we share. So not a luck that we share, sort of a unlucky standpoint, lucky occupation in life, so to speak. That of the freelancer. So how hard was it for you, as a non-English speaker, basically? How hard was it getting into the whole pitching to English editors, to editors in the UK, in the US? What was the biggest challenge that you found in particular, and how did you overcome it?
I don't think I had camping, to be honest, still. But yeah, I mean, at the beginning of it, because I had no expectations of it at all, was quite stress free. It was quite easy. I mean, basically, people asked me while I was still doing my game studies postgraduate degree, and I started doing that for fun.
Mm-hmm.
then little by little, I got kind of expanded into more prestigious outlets. The first serious outlet I wrote for was Slant magazine, which is a very kind of well respected, mostly for film, but also has a very good games section um, website. And I just send them an email. Here's me. Here's what I've already written, and I immediately got a mail back from Ed Gonzalez, the editor,
Mm-hmm.
who said, yeah, would like to work with you. So that it was very smooth. But of course, uh, these were smaller outlets, even if something like Plant is quite prestigious, and there were really no expectations. Also, not uh, enough pay or at all.
Yeah.
So the hard thing was when I made the step towards actually better paying uh, outlet to when this thing started becoming like potential job,
Mm-hmm.
then there were expectations, and then it became more stressful. Then it became something that you know uh, there would be disappointment if I didn't get a reply. There would be stress if I was there was late reply or rejection, and so on and so on. So it was at that point, at that switch between uh, I'm doing this once a month for fun, and between and I'm doing this more regularly, to get an income. That's when uh, all the all the problems, all the problematic kind of habits and structural problems in this area started to really hit home. But you know that from your own experience, I suppose, right?
Yes, and we're just, as I would say, treading water. We're just sharing what we already know in this case. But yes, we're telling it to an audience. But yeah, basically, the most difficult thing if you want to be a freelance journalist, we talk about gaming media, obviously, is getting your name out there. So getting your name recognized, getting the editors to reply to you. And I mean, of course, the good thing is that once they've started working with you, more or less the way is already, the path is already there, so that you can have an easier time. Hypothetically, of course, that doesn't mean.
Yeah, it's easier, but not easy.
Yeah,
Even with a working collaboration, sometimes you can, and I get it because the work of an editor, especially in this climate, is probably so weighed down by expectations. What they're supposed to be the multitasking on levels I cannot begin to fathom. But and bad side effect of that is that often you won't get a reply, or you get a very late reply to to your pitch.
if that, if that, yeah, most
Yeah.
cases you don't even get a reply at all. And of course, if one is just starting out, one is relatively young to the profession. I mean, I wasn't when I started out. I wasn't young, but yeah, you know what I mean. The problem, of course, is trying not to take it personally. So not to make all these rejections or even all this silence, which is even worse than rejection sometimes, maybe most times, is not to take it, yeah, not to take it personally, not to make it a personal fact, because again, as you said, these people are busy, so it's not like they're not replying because they hate you or they dislike you or even your pitch is bad, of course. But the other side of the coin is that if you're just starting out, if you don't get replies, if you're just met with silence or just generic rejection letters, like we're not interested, bye. You're not growing. That's the thing. Of course, you're not learning. You don't know anything about what might interest this magazine or this outlet. So, I mean, I was lucky because a couple of times I got very detailed rejection letters saying, you know how you could pitch this better. They were going,
Yeah,
yeah,
I'm always so grateful when I get those. It's like, hey,
absolutely.
thank you.
Exactly. I mean, of course, I can do a shout out now because it's been years, so I don't remember who was it, but I think it was someone from um, either PC Gamer or IGN. I don't know, but they have stopped working there since a long time ago, so I mean, there was no point on saying it. But yeah, they were very kind. They gave me a very long, detailed thing of how you can pitch this better, find a better hook, try to say who you are, where you come from, blah blah blah. So all things that you should do, but of course you might not know about when you start just putting yourself out there and just finding, as we said, silence and very dry, not interested rejection letter. So the first thing that I would advise anyone crazy enough to want to do this profession is try not to take it personally. Try to get in contact with someone who already has done this, so they can give you a little, tips, pointers. I mean, for example, I'm always available if anyone has any doubts or questions. Um,
Yeah, same.
so yeah, we'll try to help each other because again, it's so difficult surviving out there that we know how hard it is. So of course, it's important to teach as much as I can use this word, which is a big word, but yeah, teach a little bit how you could better pitch yourself, which of course doesn't mean getting more pitches approved. It just means that you have a better chance. That's it basically. But yeah, that's the best we could get at this point. So one last thing I wanted to mention, otherwise we're just going to talk about this the whole time, is because that's a topic that we love, so to speak. We love to complain about. Is how have you seen the landscape in editorial, in pitching, in freelancing changing over the last few years? What changes you've seen? Where do you think it is going?
Well, it's certainly, well, there's certainly much fewer outlets to pitch for. that's that's the main thing. And to be honest, I'm on a personal level, and the outlets I'm working with on a more frequent basis, things have not uh, worsened.
Hmm.
In fact, on some occasions, the rates are even better. But I suspect that's just a handful of like bigger uh, publications that can afford to do that. So your PC gamers or your Kotakus or Polygons, Rock Paper Shotgun, Eurogamer, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I suspect that's not the case at all with smaller outlets. I don't know because I don't I'm not very prolific. I don't write a lot of um, uh, articles, but so I'm working with only a few outlets. But I suspect conditions must be much harder in either smaller outlets or uh, outlets that don't give a shit about their freelancers, of which there are many, even some of the bigger ones. So yeah, it's hard to tell. It doesn't look good. It doesn't look good. I haven't I haven't personally felt much of a decline, but I think it's there, and I just uh, have personally been covered from it in terms of working conditions. But of course, like everyone else, I have been affected by closures, by outlets closing. I mean, EGM, I was working with when they closed. Um, Wireframe from print became web only. There's so many. US Gamer, you know, there's Funbyte
Fanbyte.
was damn Funbyte. Now I don't know what
Yeah.
they're doing. It's not looking good. And of course, it's not just games, right? You heard about Pitchfork yesterday. So,
Yes.
and if Pitchfork is not safe, the fuck is it?
Yes, yes. I mean, we could turn this into a 2 hour rant about where online press is going. I mean, we know physical press is basically already dead. So I say online press, but that's basically just saying press. So where is it really going? What could we do ourselves as members, so to speak, of the press to I don't know, try to provide a better content because but many times it's not even the content that's the problem. The problem is that you don't really have a lot of ways to serve it to the right audience. It's difficult to imagine a new outlet today trying to find the right audience for it, the right target audience. It would be really difficult because I mean, there's Google is just giving up the ghost at this point, so it's not even search algorithm anymore. I don't know what it is. I mean, it's of course it's an evil mega corporation, obviously, but yeah, it's not a search algorithm for sure anymore, not functioning. So yeah, I would imagine like a new outlet having lots of issues trying to find the right target audience, and we've seen a few smaller outlets like being created from all this main, this big websites dying. We'll see how they go, but I don't know because obviously if you look at how many people under I don't know 30 years old, 25 years old are actually interested in reading a piece online versus watching a video, watching a TikTok, or anything like that. I mean, I don't want to go the whole boomer rant thing, of course, but obviously, I mean, of course, I mean, it's a problem also for like 50 years old. Even 50 years old, I'm not reading anymore, obviously. So it's really a problem for everyone. But of course, the thing is, there's a difference between someone who has stopped reading and someone who has never even started. So that's it. I mean, maybe you could get that one who has stopped reading back if you provide the right content, but you will probably never get someone who has never really learned to check their news on or the news or the feature, whatever, to read a feature on a website to try to get that person to start reading their features online as opposed to get them on YouTube. So
Well, and in all cases, you're still hostile. I mean, whether it's the website with actually textual content, whether it's a video, you're still hostage. You're either hostage to YouTube, you're hostage to Twitch, you're hostage to the Google SEO. So it's still a very precarious position for smaller uh, outlets or creators. It's yeah.
yes, we definitely know we definitely know about it. Basically, yes. Any moment, Google can just yank the carpet from under you. Google, whatever whatever platform you're using, and you're just left without revenue, alone, with no audience. I mean, of course, if you're a big name, you can find another way of surviving, but you have to be a big name. So we're talking very few individuals out there, except for those a smaller website, a smaller creator, a smaller influencer, whatever. They're probably going to die off and not find another way to survive from this. But okay, this is a whole different discussion that could take like 3 hours, so we're not going to go there. So let's instead talk about I mean, let's go from something horrific to horror. So we're staying more or less on the main topic. And yes, as I mentioned in the beginning, Alexander managed after years to wrote this great book, which I was very lucky to read and review as well. And so let's talk about it. How and when the idea for the book came. I think we're talking about several years ago, right? I mean, this is an idea that you had many years ago. And
Yeah.
how did it came?
4 years ago, I think it was, yeah, 3.5 years ago. Well, it's funny because this was not intended as a book to begin with, and was not going to be on horror to begin with. So lots of transformations went there. But at some point, that was 2020, that was kind of in the middle of the pandemic, lockdowns, etc., etc. Um, outlets closing one after the other because advertising had plummeted. And in the midst of all this, the lockdowns, no work. I thought, okay, so what do I want to do with my kind of uh, creative impulses? I thought about doing a website. Actually, I even did a small announcement on Twitter. I'm not calling it X. Um, and there were a few people that were interested in getting involved. So I started thinking about it. And the way I thought I would differentiate my my website, the way I would make it something unique and interesting for people who might have some curiosity about this thing, would be I would work in thematic uh, kind of labs. So for a couple of months, we would be doing, everyone who would write about this theme. Then the next 2 or 3 months, it would be an entirely different theme. And everything would revolve around a specific theme. It's kind of like Bullet Points does, but Bullet Points does it with a specific game. Yeah. But I wanted a theme.
Okay.
So I started working on it. I had a friend kind of work up a simple website for it. And the first theme I wanted to work on, I really started kind of pushing towards that, was Westerns, Western themed games. I hadn't written anything, but I started really digging into the history, potential titles to examine, theory. Started reading academic. I mean, the Westerns are very much probed by film theory.
Yes.
So I started doing a lot of work, and at some point I thought to myself, so I'm doing all this work. There's going to be much more work involved, and for what? Making a website that basically more work and nothing in return. I thought, said to myself, you work hard, you have lots of material for this. Want to try turning it into a book? So I sent an email to Stan, who's the owner of Bitmap Books, and miracle of miracles, because we were discussing about this before, he replied. I wasn't even expecting a reply, right? And the even weirder thing is he replied with a rejection, which people probably would just ignore you. So he said, it's a very nice idea, but I think it's a bit niche. I'm not sure it would generate enough interest. And he ended with, but if you have any other ideas, I'd be happy to hear them. And I was, after several years of freelancing, I was shocked by this. I wasn't expecting any of that. So I thought, okay, I wrote an email back that sounded much calmer than I was like, hey, he said, pitch in again. And said, yeah, okay, I'll pitch it around a bit and this idea around a bit. And then if I don't get a reply, I'll get back to you with another idea. But I was already working on that other idea in my head. And that other idea was going to be about something I already knew in depth and could easily structure a book around. something that I knew for a fact would be much, much more popular uh, in a crossover manner. And that was horror. And from then on, it moved kind of swiftly to agreeing and writing the book.
Okay, that's I had no idea this actually came from a website about westerns. I actually didn't
It's
know you.
not
Go ahead, go ahead.
it's not the most direct of trajectories, but yeah, that's how it.
I mean, there are a few Western horror games which are great crossover, but yeah, just a few, just a
Absolutely.
few. So there's not, it's not really. It's a niche between a niche, I think, within a niche. Um, but yeah, that's interesting actually. And of course, the thing that captures my heart, but we talk about this I think on Twitter, is that you took a different approach on the book rather as opposed to other authors which might have been just going all in with the history of Resident Evil, the history of Clock Tower, the history of Silent Hill, classic game. Oh, maybe Clock Tower is not that classic. Okay, the history of the classics, which would be a really easy hook to get people who like horror games to read your book. But you went into a different direction. So uh, you decided not only to span 6 decades of gaming horror, so that's a lot of history to cover, but also right from the get-go, so right from the forward, you make clear that your approach is going to be, let's look at some more obscure stuff. So how did that approach come about? Is it just your love for more niche, obscure stuff? Did Was the editor okay with this? I mean, did you agree right that away on this?
Okay, so the thematic approach was, I suppose, that was also inspired partly by the
The
original
website.
idea for the website, but also, as you pointed out, it has very much to do with my love of obscure stuff, of games. It's not even just love; it's kind of a desire to drag them back into visibility, like react against the unfairness of their being uh, unknown,
Yes.
just because Sony and Nintendo and Microsoft dominate the current landscape and they don't have any use for like a Commodore 64 game that came out 40 years ago. So that was a very strong part of that as well. But I also thought it would make for a much more interesting book. I mean, you have your histories of Resident Evil and of Silent Hill. You don't need one more. Uh, on the contrary, I thought that by splitting the book up in themes, as I did, and discussing those themes and see how they evolve uh, across the decades and across different titles
Hmm.
would give some interesting, hopefully, insights into the more fundamental aspects of what horror is and what horror gaming is. Something that you don't necessarily see if you focus on just the more popular titles, and something you would not see if you went with a strict chronological history,
Yes.
because there's many horror games that came out in, say, 1996, but they're not necessarily connected in ways other than uh, technology and trends of that particular era. I mean, these are important connections. I'm not discounting them, but there are other connections to be made. Like, for example, the I found that that was not something that I kind of had an idea of beforehand. It's something that occurred to me because I was writing in this thematic way.
Hmm.
I found out that many horror games that are set in forests are playing tricks with your vision. They're trying to overwhelm you
Yeah.
um, uh, in terms of your visual stimuli. So that's an interesting thing to know for a very specific uh, category of game. I wouldn't have noticed that if I had gone the strict chronological, like 1988 we had this, 1989 we did this. I noticed there's a chapter on the book in the book on text adventures,
Mm-hmm.
and the weirdest thing I realized, text adventures were huge in the early to mid 80s, right?
Mm-hmm.
They were very big. They were selling numerous copies, Infocom especially, and they had super prestigious collaborations like Douglas Adams, like Arthur Clarke. You know, there were huge names collaborating with text adventure developers. In this climate, there were almost no horror text adventure games.
Hmm.
And that was a very weird thing to realize when I specifically looked at that area. And we have some interviewees. I have my own ideas, and some interviewees, some of the influential people from that era have their opinions on why that might be the case in the book. I would never have noticed that if it weren't for the thematic structure. So I think it makes for a more interesting approach, and I think it makes for an approach that helps generate different insights than sticking to Resident Evils and Silent Hills.
Yeah, which also leads to make the reader realize a lot of different things, because again, my, for example, speaking of text adventure, my perception would have been that horror text adventure were just a thing, you know, were basically the same number of games that we have today, so they would just be a regular subgenre of text adventures. But yes, they were actually way more rare than one might come to realize at a
Yeah,
time where.
I think at some point by the mid 80s there were more uh, noir or spy related text adventures than horror text adventures, which is completely crazy if you compare it with like the same themes nowadays.
Mhm. Yes. Yeah, I mean, it is interesting because you would, I mean, we would think, but of course, we're thinking today, we would think that text adventure would be a perfect way to recreate a horror experience, because you have no images, but then then again you have just this whole atmosphere of silence, of just having the player completely immersed in the screen, in the text, in the narrative. So it would be real easy to, I mean, not do a jump scare, because you can't really do a jump scare, but to scare them
No,
into the, you know, into the story, to get them in, to reel them in, and then whack, deliver the scares, the hook. But yeah.
especially given the uh, inclination of publishers in the 80s to collaborate with famous authors, it would have been ideal.
Exactly.
It didn't happen.
Exactly. So it is interesting that a thematic approach is, you know, makes you realize things that a strictly chronological approach otherwise would not really, would maybe would make you lose some things along the way, because you would be so focused on, like, what's the evolution of the, you know, of the horror genre, if we could call it a genre, which is something you go into, but okay, of the horror subgenre narrative over the years. So where did we start from? How did it evolve in the, say, in the 80s, in the 90s? You would be so focused on that you would probably like lose some of the more thematic approach and themes, so to speak. Um, another question that I had, obviously, is, and I'm pretty sure the answer is going to be very, but let me ask you anyway. How difficult was it to select which games you were going to include, and which games you were going to say, Okay, maybe I'm not going to include this.
Okay, yeah, that's an interesting question, and there's many factors that went into that. Of course, there were personal favorites or games I thought were underrated or unfairly forgotten
The chef's
that
choice, so to
had to
speak.
be in there. Certain classics also had to be in there, but I made a rule for myself
Mm-hmm.
just in order for me to have a better spread. I made a rule that there won't be two games from the same franchise in the same chapter. So that's for example the reason why there's no Silent Hill 2
Mm-hmm.
in the game. There's no Resident Evil 4 in the game. The relevant chapter for those games, because I was very strict in what goes where. So the only chapter these could fit in would be the survival horror chapter.
Yeah.
But their places were already taken by the original Resident Evil, the original Silent Hill. So, that was the rule I imposed on myself to make the choice, the range of games, a bit wider. And then I tried to have, as much as I could, a fairly even spread between decades.
Mm-hmm.
So that was another factor. Like a game might be worthy for inclusion, but if I already have like 4 games from the 90s in this particular chapter, like the horrors of the abyss chapter, then I'm probably taking one out and adding another to the 80s or to the not. Uh, so that was also something that shaped the choice. I made a huge uh, database of titles, everything I could remember, everything I could kind of dig up.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Fairly detailed one. So it's like I think it's the point where I left it was like something like 1,500 games, and all had a side note about potential chapter maxes.
Mm.
So at the end, when I had to make the final decision, apart from the titles that were set in stone, I went through, saw everything available, and tried to, make the choice from that point on, so it could fit with the logic of the book. Like a fairly even spread between decades, platforms. I wanted to cover many platforms, play styles, genres, etc. So that was pretty much the whole idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because of course I would imagine that having an even spread between decades is already quite difficult because obviously you would have 90s and the 2000s like having a very big specific weight on the book as opposed to the 80s and 70s. I mean, of course, the 80s you could find a lot several arcade style
Actually, I
games.
think I, that's probably personal preferences, personal bias. But I actually, if I remember correctly, I think the 80s have the most uh, represented, are represented by the most games in the book. I, I'm,
It's
I'm sure you're not surprised. I'm sure you're not
no,
surprised.
and I'm happy, of course, about that because I mean, I was, for example, I mean, knowing you, I was more than sure that Project Firestart would have a very good representation as opposed to other games from the 80s because I mean I know that you like the game a lot and yes I also try to always sneak it in when talking about the history of survival horror and the, the progenitors, so to speak. So the games that came first in the 80s, as opposed to always talking about the same stuff over and over. So it's definitely interesting to find ways of sneaking Project Firestart whenever possible. Um, but of course, this leads to a question. This whole selection process. Were there games that you really wanted to include and left out? Are there any titles that you got caught at the last minute, or you decide, yeah, I can't use this?
Okay, weirdly enough, there's there's not many. I mean, there's some, but there's not too many. But weirdly enough, the game that I feel almost kind of regret
Hmm.
for not including, and I'm not sure even why I never included it, because it could have probably fit in my last chapter, the chapter on new retro horror. But I originally intended it for the space horror chapter,
Mm-hmm.
and it never got in. Was I have to look it up. It's an indie title that I just found completely by chance on itch.
Yeah,
And
look it up.
oh shit, what's and okay, so it's the person who did this Western horror uh, game from last year.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what was their name?
So it is a modern game anyway. It's not from the 80s.
Yes, yes, yes. It's a modern game.
Okay.
It's a growing old.
Yeah.
Memory goes.
Nah, it's okay. It's okay. It happens to the best of us.
Okay, is this thing gonna be edited?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you wanna look it up, look it up.
Okay, so if it's going to be edited, let me just look it up because
Yeah,
it's
go.
driving me crazy.
Yeah, look it up. There's
Okay.
no worries. We'll do a transition or something.
Kingdom of Dead or something. Kingdom. Kingdom Dead. Okay, I got the other title. So I found the person. Dirigo game. Okay, yeah, thank you. Stowaway. I'll send you a link. It's really nice. So yeah, the game, it's very obviously an alien inspired game. Indie kind of has a sort of early PC kind of the CGA aesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
So you're in a spaceship and you're wandering the corridors. Something happens. You're wandering the corridors. It's very, very strikingly visualized. Very simple, but very effective. And it's by the person. It's Dirigo Games, the person who made Kingdom of the Dead, Western horror game last year. And I for some reason, I don't know, maybe it was the fact that I played it just when I was starting to get the idea. I thought I really wanted that in the book, but then it never happened. I don't know, maybe in the sequel or something.
in the second revision of the book. And what I also find interesting, whenever any of us, so any of us historians or journalists, researchers, whatever you want to call us, derelicts, do do this kind of anthology, or even like it's a simple list online of games that were like for any topical reason important to the development of a genre or a theme or whatever. The big comment, the big reaction you get from people, and I'm sure you got that a lot, is why is X not included in this? Which is, I mean, on one hand, I understand. I mean, humanly, I understand it, right? I mean, we want our favorites to always be, to find representation. We want representation. We're not a community of a small community of a minority, so to speak. We're not a minority of any kind, but we always want our games to be represented on any list. Okay, humanly, I get it. Okay, that's fine. But the thing is, I would be more interested in finding out what I don't know rather than just reading about what I do know already. So, I mean, if you're going to include my favorite game in a book, I would guess that most of the things you're going to write, I probably already know. I mean, of course, you can fit. I mean, an interview in this case with the author, so there might be new things, but you know, 80% I would guess I know already if it's one of my favorites. So it doesn't really help me in any way. It doesn't help me grow. It's just for my personal enjoyment. It's just yes, my favorite game got mentioned. That's very nice. That I'm happy about that. But who cares? I mean, I don't. I don't go buy an anthology book or anything like that, hoping that I will find Rings of Power. Of course, I'm the Rings of Power guy. I always talk about that damn game all the time. Uh, because I don't care. I mean, I know about Rings of Power already. I mean, of course, I'm happy if anyone else mentions it, whatever. But I haven't made it. I'm not the creator, so I'm not that invested in finding it on other people's books. So yeah, but so how many before you ended in the book? So before the people got the book, how much were you expecting that reaction from the audience, and were the reactions more or less what you expect? I mean, were they even more than you expected, or more or less what you expected?
Yeah, so what you're saying was exactly the main. Sam, the Bitmap Books owner, was very enthusiastic about the whole unique, different approach, the thematic approach. But that was the one thing that worried him, like, and myself to a lesser degree,
Mm-hmm.
because we knew that people would want to see a certain set of titles in there that I wasn't necessarily going to represent, at least not all of them.
Yeah.
So it was a gamble in a way, and it's a risk I took, we took, in the hopes that both the structure of the book, the quality of the book, and clear kind of explanatory forward introduction would kind of deflate. So I tried to explain my rationale as best as possible in the introduction. And to my surprise, not too big of a surprise, but yeah, it was a positive surprise. I've seen only very few complaints. I mean, there are a few, but I've seen people being very enthusiastic about the book as is. I've even seen people saying, okay, I would have liked for X or Y game to be there, but I can understand why there weren't, and I'm happy with the choices. Coming back to the fundamentals of these things, what you were discussing before, I think there's two types of readers, like very roughly approached. Like there's those that will get this for a sense of recognition. I know that, I'm happy. It's like ticking a box.
Yeah.
And there's readers who will go to this for discovery. And I wrote this book for the second set of readers. I mean, there's many of the most well-known, the most famous games in there, so there's bound to be some recognition. But this is a book that will really be appreciated, I think, by those who want to discover stuff.
Absolutely. That was my favorite thing, in that there were a lot of, I mean, there were a lot of games I myself, a lover of obscure stuff. no idea about. I mean, not even heard about. So, we're not even saying. I'm not even saying, oh, which I never played. I mean, I could have just said, oh, I knew all the games in this. Maybe there was some I didn't play, but no, they were actually, they're actually some I had never heard about. I mean, I have no problem meeting it. I'm glad actually. I'm always happy to discover new stuff. So,
But there's games in there that are not in the Moby Games uh, list.
list.
There's games there that have no YouTube videos associated with them whatsoever. There's some really, really obscure stuff.
Yes, which actually, is kind of a shame because there's things that are even difficult to play nowadays, which is.
Yeah.
But that's another discussion. I mean, that's a discussion about preservation.
Oh, you won't believe. At some other point, that's not necessarily recorded for people to bore them with. I might have to tell you about my adventures of getting a certain TRS 80 game to play. The amount of tweaking on the emulator is just insane. It was hours and hours.
I can, I can imagine. I can imagine. Um, but yeah, so I mean, really, what I loved about this, of course, was the approach that you took from the beginning. So not just merely trying to recreate how did the adventure genre go from point X to point Y, from point A to point B, but really do a thematic sweep of the themes that could be found in the horror genre, and so you could include a lot of stuff that maybe it's not significant in an historical point of view, but it's still significant in the theme that you adopted. So it was quite a smart way, so to speak, to include a lot of stuff that otherwise you couldn't really talk about because they didn't make anything new, so to speak. If even though that term in gaming is I always hated it, so because does this game do anything new? But okay, that's a different discussion. I'm not gonna go there. But for example, there's some choices which might be also how can we say surprising even for an audience which is
controversial.
Of course, controversial. Yeah, that's the right word. For example, that one that's very striking, I would say, is especially for people who might not really know the game except for the very surface, and this is a joke.
I think I know which one you're going to say. Yeah.
For the surface, because for Ectodolphin, that's and I mean because. I mean, of course, it's understandable if you don't know about this because that was an incredibly hard game. So it's we're not going to judge anyone who hasn't gone and discovered what lies beneath, and that's another joke. And I'm gonna make it an endless string of jokes. I mean, even myself. I mean, I played it back in the day. Of course, as a kid, I had no clue really that they were going in that direction. I had no idea. And I did play it. I mean, before the book, like 5 or 6 years ago, and I was like, "What were they thinking? What were they? How does this go from like a cutesy environmental kind of a game to something alien inspired, horrific, and disquieting as well?" But of course, that's the best thing about the game, obviously. But yeah, so some of these controversial choices I think really make the book way more interesting than just sticking to the basic stuff. And yeah, for example, I recently, I mean, I always say recently, but that might have been 2 years ago at this point, if not even more. Talked about Friday the 13th, the game. So we're not talking about the recent one, obviously, because we're old. We're talking about the old 1985, if I remember correctly, game on computers. So it came out on Commodore 64, ZX Spectrum, terrible port, and Amstrad CPC, if I remember correctly.
Well, not that it was a great game anyway, but
no,
it had its moments.
But yeah, but the interesting thing about it is that I mean I discussed it a lot with a lot of people who read the article because I also said something controversial, which I don't think you go into, but I understand why you didn't. It might be too controversial. I said this is the first game to feature a jump scare. So this is the first time that the jump scare movie idea is used in a game. And a lot of people replied to me saying, that's not true. And they made example like for example, Rescue on Fractalus from LucasArts, which had a similar idea that you could be attacked by a monster. I'm not gonna go into detail, but yeah, basically that came out of the blue, and it would crack your ship or something like that. It's been years since I played it, which it might be a fair point. But then again, Rescue on Fractalus, you could argue a lot of things about it, but it's not really a horror game, so it doesn't really fit.
Explicitly inspired by cinema. With Friday the 13th, you got the shot, you got the screen, you got the kind of the static
Image.
flattery shot, and that's obviously inspired from the cinematic jump scare. So yeah,
And it's also, I mean, my one point of reasoning is that it is completely useless in the game. It doesn't serve any purpose. I mean, on Rescue on Fractalus, it lets you know that you're being attacked, so it has a purpose. So you're being attacked, and either you're fucked, or I mean, you could escape. So it has a point. In Friday the 13th, it doesn't serve any purpose. It's just a really loud, synthesized scream and a scary image. Even though okay, but whatever. We're not gonna go there. Scary image, and it doesn't really serve any purpose. So that's exactly, except to scare the player, obviously. Yes. So that's why I argued, yes, this is the first jump scare.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah.
That's the first jump scare in the game, and so I mean that comes back into the point that into the what you were saying, that there's a lot of stuff that can be explored, can be found, if we're not sticking just into historical theme, because obviously no one is going to make the history of jump scare in gaming, because I hope so, at least. I mean, it could be an interesting pitch. So I mean, if anyone out there wants to take it, do it. But I mean, historically, it's not really relevant. That's something that could be found, yeah, if you're doing a thematic sweep of games and you're finding little stuff, interesting gems, and stuff like that. So I would say, but overall, the reaction to the books have been really positive. So I think you've been happy about the reactions. What did you want the audience, the public, to get from the book? So we talked a bit about this, but if there's something more specific that you hoped the audience would get.
Well, yeah, I mean, as I said, like the joy of discovery. If a reader discovers new things that kind of grabs their attention, if reading for a game they've never heard of before, they go and try to track it down, like maybe watch a YouTube video of it or try to read about it elsewhere, then I'm happy. That's my main thing. And the other thing is, and this was encapsulated in a review I had for the book. I think it was Game Freezer, the website, and the author of the review, who's a horror fan, but also his wife is a horror fan, kind of narrated this experience where he started reading to her a text, an excerpt from the book, which was describing in kind of colorful terms what in reality was just a simple Nintendo Game & Watch game, Octopus specifically. Now, there's two possible reactions to this, to my right of Octopus. I've included Octopus. I don't know if you remember it was the little Game & Watch with a giant. So there's two possible reactions to this, and I get both, I guess. One reaction is, this guy's writing bullshit. Like, is that a horror game? So I get it. I don't agree, but I get it. The other thing is, this was the early 80s. So we're looking for horror themes, uh, not for real horror experience at that point.
Yeah.
Um, so when the writer read that excerpt to his wife, without revealing what the game was, her reaction was, "Whoa, I've never thought of that game this way," and this gives a whole new perspective to this game. And this, if I manage to do this with the writer, that's also something that makes me very happy, because criticism is not about telling you whether a game is good or not good, whether a film is good or not good. This is something you can work out for yourself. Criticism is about exploring alternative perspectives on what a game or a film or a book might mean to you.
Yep.
And, if people are sold on my perspectives, then I'm happy.
Yeah, which of course this this is going back to a classic topic and question, like what does scare us as human beings, and obviously each person has a different answer. So of course, I mean the biggest fear might be that of dying, really. So clearly all horror, like not all horror, but most horror stuff stems from that. So stems from the fear of dying. So obviously a horror creature is something that wants you dead. That's a real basic stuff. If you can die, is it really a horror game? So that would be like the first interesting the first interesting question that one could ask. Of course the answer might be yes, because again we will say it's just the basic stuff. So obviously you can absolutely, actually you should make a horror game where you can die, actually, and that's the worst thing that can happen to you. I mean, that's another good idea. So if anyone's making a lot of ideas today, okay, bad ideas obviously.
What was that game where a couple of years ago, The Longing, where you just waited?
Yes.
Haven't played it, but
Yeah.
that might be somewhere in that vein.
Yes. For example, that's not a game that's being marketed as horror, but again, is there something more horrific than the thought of waiting eternally for something? I mean, for me, for example, that's way scarier than dying. It's just waiting eternally for something that might or might not come, might not happen. So that's, for me at least, that's way more scary. But yeah, going back to the book, is the of course the inclusion of some games rather than others, so of like Octopus or Jack and the Beanstalk, for example, is does that really scare you? I mean, is that really scary? And of course you have to imagine, as you said, we're talking about the 70s and the early 80s, so going back to games that were being marketed for the most part to children. And so you also, I mean, in reading this, I think you also have to make an effort of going back in time and imagining yourself in that position, because otherwise that will not work, obviously. I mean, if you look at Octopus, as you said today, with modern audience look, you're going to be like, oh, that's cute. That's not horrific, obviously. But yeah, because I said this a lot of times. For example, I was always more scared by sound as a kid, as a child, rather than images. So if you showed me like the Friday the 13th machete going through the head, I would be like, oh, that's cool. that's not scary. That's cool. But yes.
But the scream.
Yes, that's the thing. So if you would show me like a black image with the scare, the synthesized scare coming out of nowhere, that would scare the fuck out of me. And that also brings me back to the one I always say, like I'm sure you've played it, the detective game on Commodore 64 from 1987, I think it is, which has a really short 3 notes theme every time you find dead people. And again, that's not a horror game. I mean, obviously, it's a classic detective. It's in the title, so detective investigation kind of game, like like Deja Vu, if you want to say another thing like that. But for me, it was incredibly scary, for example. So again, I would have been perfectly fine if you decided to, to include it, even just a small mention, just at the end, because that's probably what they were going for. That's probably I haven't asked the author. I might someday, but that's what they were going for. Like if you discover a dead body that's being squashed by a piano, for example, which is might be almost comedic if we think about it today. Uh, but if you present it to a child out of nowhere, so like they walk into a room in the game, they find, whoa, this big piano that wasn't there before, three theme, very loud death theme. That's it. You got the audience scared. So it's really just about in looking still at games today. You still have to look at, especially if we're talking about 70s and 80s, through the eyes of children, which is a beautiful thing because it's not about nostalgia. Because fuck nostalgia.
It's not just children. It's also the eyes of someone who's not yet familiar with the medium
True.
and does not know what to expect. The expectations are not there. I remember a story. My great uncle um, was telling me. So he had watched Frankenstein, like the James Whale Frankenstein in 1930, fantastic film. He had watched it in the cinema, right? And he was telling me that when he watched it, when the monster came out, there was a woman watching uh, with him that kind of screamed and put her hands in front. Have you watched Frankenstein nowadays? It's a masterpiece. Of course, it's a fantastic film. The Bride is even better. But no one is getting scared from this now. They're not children, because the medium was young then, and people were not accustomed to these experiences and could be scared from it. So I'm approaching early horror or horror themed games in a similar way. For their time and for our set of expectations, even not necessarily for children, they had an impact that it's really, really hard to imagine nowadays if you don't actively try to understand how something unfamiliar as this might affect you at the time.
Because of course, one thing we forget is that the gaming medium has evolved much faster than other mediums. So we were talking about Frankenstein. Frankenstein, is almost 100 years old. So obviously, we're talking about a lot of time ago. So if you say to someone today, "Oh, we're going to see a movie from 100 years ago," their expectations are going to be very low. I mean, it's like, hey, this is from 100 years, so it's going to be primitive. Which that's, of course, that's not exactly true, but that's what their expectations would be. But the gaming medium has evolved much faster. So obviously, we're talking about, for example, a game that's we mentioned a couple of games that were barely 40 years old, for example. So they're not. I mean, they're old. Let's not kid ourselves. We are old as well, but they're not that old. So they're not like from 100 years ago. But you would have to have the same perspective as a movie from 100 years ago. So it's different. You have to think about, because of course a lot of times, especially when we're talking about horror, again we often make the mistake of comparing the gaming media to the cinema, to the movies, and of course that's normal, that's understandable, but a lot of times that leads to mistakes, to wrong ways of looking at games, because you have certain expectations, you have certain themes, you have certain ideas, and which might be distorted by this lens. So, of course, for example, you mentioned Frankenstein, but the classic example of expectations is the famous Lumiere movie with the with the train going towards the screen, towards the camera, and people getting scared because no one at the time, we were talking about way more than 100 years ago, had seen a movie. So they had no idea what they were seeing, what they were experiencing. And that's I think, it's really what your approach to the horror games would be. Like, we're seeing this for the first time. So we're an experienced audience. And so even a really basic thing like, yeah, an octopus on a screen that's barely animated by lights going here, by LED going, LCD going on and off, can be disquieting, can be something scary. And I think that there's something beautiful in going back and imagining that kind of influence on a very young and experienced audience. I think that's really the thing that you captured well in the book, in the selection. So not just going, okay, so there's a zombie, there's a vampire, so it's horror. That's really basic. So you definitely went the extra mile, and that's something that I think should be commended. But if I have to make a critique now, get ready for it. Now, actually, I haven't mentioned this in the review, but again, it's something that's I mean, that's normal. It's a critique that you couldn't really do anything about that, obviously. But I mean, the thing is that there's a lot of great interviews in the book, and a lot of these interviews are very short. So that's what I was most angry about. It's like, I want to know more. Why doesn't this stop like after 3 or 4 sentences?
I know. It was just a matter of uh, of including a fairly wide range of games, and that's not even that many games for a Bitmap books publication. I mean, other books um, have even more
Yeah,
than I have. Some like 130 something, 132, I think.
yeah, the point and click adventure.
Other yeah, yeah. So and I try to. I mean, obviously there are some interviews that I had the lots of interesting um, notes and points and recollections, and I try to devote a little more space. Perhaps there are a few with a couple more pages in them, but yeah, there were always going to be uh, a bit short.
Sacrifices have to be made, so to speak. But
As you know.
yeah, do you plan on doing anything with the interviews, or maybe pop
It,
up?
it's I mean, there's depending on the interview, there can be quite a lot of material left out. There's a chance I may do something with it. It's I'm still in the post publication process of trying to work out what I'm going to do next. So there's some horror related things I'm kind of considering, and that's an aspect of that as well.
Mm-hmm. So, do you see a potential? I mean, you mentioned it, but let's ask directly. Do you see a potential for a sequel to the book, from Ants to Zombies to The Revenge?
Payback time.
Payback time.
Well, one of the great things about the thematic structure compared to the chronological structure, of course, because I would have just exhausted the thing, exhausted anyway, uh, is that not only can it accommodate a sequel, but hopefully, if people like this, it might get them excited to find out what's next. I mean, what other archetypal horror settings uh, can be covered, or what other um, horror villains or monsters can we structure a chapter around. So yeah, I'm considering it. I mean, it's very hard work, and I'm not ready for a project of such a scale yet. probably something a bit more low key uh, as a rest stop. But yeah, if there's interest, um, I may still do it. And of course, it's the thing. I mean, I don't know or play only horror games. I could write on a wide range of subjects, but it's the thing I'm probably most knowledgeable about. So it would be nice to revisit the theme.
But if you were given the opportunity, would you still do the same thing? I mean, not of course the same amount of work, but again, a similar idea for the Western that you were talking about, Western games.
Yeah, yeah. It's still something. I mean, it almost came up without me realizing it, but um, I could. It's something that interests me, both in terms of the narrative themes that you can get from film, uh, and in terms of how the genre, it's not the genre, how that theme was approached within games throughout history. And there's many interesting games in that um, category. So yeah, it would be a fun thing to dive. But I'm also counting it as one of the more research-heavy things because there's a lot of theoretical background that I kind of feel. I mean, I'm not writing for academics. It's not jargon heavy and dense. I hope, uh, but I feel that to write about it, I need to have that knowledge beforehand
Yes.
and then try to convey it in a more straightforward manner.
Yeah. But also, yes, well, one other thing I want to mention, which I forgot, is that, of course, we talk a lot about good games, bad games, blah, blah, blah. And again, that's another discussion. But the way you approach the work is that, of course, it allows you to talk about any games. You don't we don't even need to go into, okay, do you recommend the game? Do you not recommend it? Because again, that's not what the point of this is. So some people might, actually want to play some of the games mentioned and find out that they are terrible. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it can happen. But of course, as always a big defender of bad games
Yeah.
myself, I find that many times they're way more interesting than the good games, because unfortunately that's also part of the obscurity that we were talking about, because good games are obviously mentioned a lot, are talked about a lot, are researched a lot. So, let's give something else a chance. So let's give something else their space, because there's still, people worked on these games, and no, as I always say, no one sets out to make a bad game. Okay, maybe some people do, but okay. Generally, for the most part, no one wants to have their names attached to a bad game, to a bad product. So no one sets out. So it's always
Plus, even a bad game can have one or two very interesting aspects about it,
absolutely.
and that's what I'm trying to focus on in the book. I mean, I'm not saying, for example, the Atari 2600 Halloween is like a masterpiece, but if you focus on the things it tries to do to translate the film experience into a game, then it becomes an interesting game. It's
Yes.
not the greatest Atari game,
It has
but
some
you know,
very good shading though. But yeah, absolutely. That's the thing. I mean, it's the same with the Friday the 13th that we were mentioned before. Like, I said that it's a very good video game for the movies, because the movies are not art. They're just run of the mill slasher movies. I mean, they're even more commercial, more mainstream than Nightmare on Elm Street. Figure that out. So obviously a game that makes that might be as good as the movies, especially if we're talking about mid 80s, cannot be a good game. Obviously, I mean that it wouldn't make sense. And yeah, Halloween. Okay, that might be a different discussion, of course, but I mean, Halloween at the time, obviously, Halloween today. probably that game would be even more than the series would deserve. But that's another discussion. But again, yes, we mentioned bad games that had very good ideas that good games on the other hand did not, because for most of the time, and I'm going to end the topic on this because we're going to be here all day. Bad games a lot of the times have ideas that good games don't have, because good games for the most part, so we're talking about very generic good game framework, are built on ideas that were already there. So
Yeah.
they're just using
The
stuff.
Eurogamer 8s, the Eurogamer 8s, those games, yeah. The
Yes,
the yeah, I know what you mean. They're much more reluctant to try something new.
exactly. So they're just built on what made other games successful, or the previous game in the series but did this, so let's make this a little bit better but just do the same thing. So we could make a lot of examples of Silent Hill 2, whatever. You could make a lot of examples of games that took what the predecessor did and made it better, and that's why they were successful. But a bad game doesn't have that restrictions, so it's way more free of trying shit out. So I didn't want to go into a rant on bad games. I'm sorry. So yeah, let me let me end this by saying,
Always welcome.
let's say that, yeah, give bad games a chance because you might be surprised. And I'm gonna shut up on this. So one last question to Alexander. So we mentioned about yeah, you're figuring stuff out into the post book release, kind of scary, relaxed and scary, I would say. So it's probably both moment. And but yeah, what are you working on at the moment, and what you would like to work on in the future?
Well, it's nothing too specific other than a few pieces here and there, like reviews and stuff. I'm basically trying to kind of find out what I'm going to do next. I have a few ideas for other things as well. And I'm trying to narrow this down, see what's feasible, see what I'd like to do. Probably not a super research intense, super heavy project like Romance to Zombies, something tiny bit lighter. But yeah, I'm in the process of finding out myself. I would definitely, I love the experience. It was demanding, but it was also kind of, it was really creative, and I love also not having to pitch all the time, going back to the freelance woes. So I'd love to try another book. We'll see what the topic of that might be and if it will come about. There's many genres, themes, and kind of ideas floating around.
Great. That sounds good. Of course, we'll be more. I'll be or will be more than happy to read whatever you have planned for the future, whatever book. But yeah, thank you, Alexander, for being with us. And again, we'll be sticking the link from Ants to Zombies, not from Zombies to Ants. I'm sorry, it's reversed. In the comments. So definitely a recommendation from me, from us, to the absolutely interesting book which might open your eyes and hearts to games that you did not know about and might be interested in, to be scared from, or might not be scared from. I mean, that doesn't really matter, I think, at this point. Again, yeah, thank you, Alexander, for being with us, and
Thank you for having me.
yeah, we'll see you all next time. Thank you for listening.